William stared at the empty coffee cup in his hands, watching the last drops of morning brew settle at the bottom. The kitchen felt too quiet, too still. Sarah's laughter used to fill this space every morning as she burned toast and sang off-key to the radio. Now the silence pressed against his ears like cotton. He had been sitting at the same kitchen table for 3 hours, unable to move. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time that felt meaningless. Outside, the world continued spinning. Cars drove past their small house on Maple Street. Children walked to school with backpacks bouncing on their shoulders. Life moved forward, but William remained frozen in place. The accident happened 6 months ago on a rainy Tuesday evening. Sarah had been driving home from her job at the local library when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact was instant. The doctors said she felt no pain. William clung to that thought during the endless nights when sleep refused to come. Their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, knocked on the door every morning at exactly 8:30. She brought casseroles and kind words, though William barely touched the food. Today, like all other days, he heard her gentle tapping but couldn't bring himself to answer. He knew she meant well, but talking to people felt like climbing a mountain with no oxygen. The house held memories in every corner. Sarah's reading glasses still sat on the nightstand next to their bed. Her favorite mug with the chipped handle remained in the cupboard, waiting for her return. William couldn't bring himself to move these things. They were proof that she had existed, that their love had been real. He remembered their first meeting at a bookstore downtown. Sarah was reaching for a cookbook on a high shelf, her dark hair falling across her face as she stretched. William had offered to help, and when she smiled at him, something inside his chest had awakened. That was 7 years ago, and he had loved her more with each passing day. Their wedding had been simple, but perfect. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, and William borrowed his father's tie. They exchanged vows in the small church where Sarah had attended Sunday school as a child. The reception was held in the church basement, with homemade decorations and a cake baked by Sarah's aunt. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. They had dreamed of having children someday. Sarah would point to baby clothes in store windows and imagine their future son or daughter wearing them. They had picked out names and planned how they would decorate a nursery. Those dreams felt like cruel jokes now, reminders of a future that would never arrive. Work had become impossible for William. His supervisor at the construction company had been patient, offering him extended leave to grieve. But William knew he couldn't return to his old life. Everything reminded him of Sarah, the lunch she used to pack for him, the text messages she would send during his breaks, the way she worried when he worked on tall buildings. Friends tried to help in their own ways. His best friend Mike called every few days, inviting him to watch football games or grab dinner. William always declined. He appreciated the concern, but he couldn't pretend to care about normal things when his world had collapsed. Sarah's sister Emma visited regularly, bringing fresh flowers and stories about her kids. She looked so much like Sarah that sometimes William's heart would skip, thinking for a moment that Sarah had returned. Emma's eyes held the same sadness that lived in William's chest. They shared their grief in quiet moments, remembering the woman they both loved. The nights were the hardest part. William would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around him. Sometimes he would hear sounds that made his heart race with hope. A creak in the hallway, the whisper of wind through the trees outside their bedroom window. For brief seconds, he would think Sarah was coming home from a late shift at the library. But she never came. William had stopped eating regular meals. Food tasted like cardboard in his mouth. He survived on coffee and whatever leftovers neighbors brought over. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a stranger with hollow eyes and gray skin. The letters from the insurance company sat unopened on the dining room table. Legal documents about settlements and claims felt meaningless. Money couldn't bring Sarah back or fill the emptiness that had taken root in his chest. He would deal with those things eventually, but not today. Sarah's car still sat in their driveway, covered by a blue tarp. William couldn't bear to look at it, but he also couldn't arrange to have it towed away. The vehicle represented the last moments of Sarah's life, and removing it felt like erasing another piece of her existence. Their dog, a golden retriever named Chester, had been staying with Emma since the accident. William couldn't care for himself, let alone a pet, but he missed Chester's warm presence and the way the dog would rest his head on Sarah's lap while she read books in the evening. The seasons had changed since Sarah's death. Spring had turned to summer, then autumn, and now winter was approaching. William watched the leaves fall from the oak tree in their backyard, thinking about how Sarah loved autumn. She would make apple cider and light cinnamon candles throughout the house. She would force William to rake leaves just so she could jump in the piles. Those memories felt both precious and painful. They were all he had left of her, but they also highlighted everything he had lost. William found himself caught between wanting to remember and needing to forget, trapped in a maze of emotions with no clear path forward. Dr. Martinez, the grief counselor that Emma had found, called twice a week. William never answered the phone, but he listened to the voicemails. The doctor's voice was gentle and patient, offering appointment times and reminders that healing was possible. William wasn't ready to believe that yet. Sometimes William would sit in Sarah's chair by the living room window, the one where she used to read mystery novels and watch birds at their feeder. He would close his eyes and try to feel her presence, to catch some echo of her spirit in the familiar space. But the chair felt empty, cold despite the afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass. The photo albums remained closed in the hall closet. William knew they were there, filled with images of their life together, wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, candid moments of everyday happiness. But looking at those photos felt like pressing on a fresh wound. Maybe someday he would be strong enough to face them, but that day hadn't arrived. Church bells rang in the distance, marking the noon hour. William realized he had been sitting in the same position for hours, his coffee long cold. His neck ached, and his legs had gone numb. But moving required energy he didn't possess. Everything felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled its pull on his body. The mailbox at the end of their driveway overflowed with sympathy cards and bills. William hadn't collected the mail in weeks. Important documents probably needed his attention, but he couldn't summon the motivation to care. The world outside their house felt foreign and hostile, a place where people continued living despite his loss. Sarah's garden had withered without her care. The roses she had planted along the front fence were brown and brittle. Weeds grew where vegetables once flourished. William knew she would be heartbroken to see her flowers dying, but he lacked the knowledge and energy to save them. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the kitchen floor, William finally stood from his chair. His joints protested the movement, stiff from hours of sitting. He walked to the sink and rinsed his empty coffee cup, performing the simple task like a robot following programmed instructions. The phone rang, startling him from his mechanical motions. The caller ID showed Emma's name. William stared at the device, knowing he should answer. Emma worried about him constantly, and ignoring her calls only added to her pain. But talking required pretending he was okay, and he couldn't manage that performance today. The answering machine clicked on, and Emma's voice filled the kitchen. She talked about bringing dinner over, about the kids asking when Uncle William would visit again. Her words carried love and concern, but they also carried expectations. She needed him to heal, to move forward, to become the man he used to be. William understood her hopes, but that man had died with Sarah. What remained was a shell, going through the motions of existence without purpose or joy. He didn't know if the person he used to be would ever return, or if this hollow version was all that was left. The house grew dark as evening approached. William didn't turn on any lights. He preferred the shadows and the way they hid the emptiness around him. Darkness felt appropriate for his current state of mind. It matched the blackness that had settled in his heart since that terrible Tuesday evening. Somewhere in the distance, a woman's voice carried on the wind. For just a moment, William's heart leaped with impossible hope. But it was only Mrs. Henderson calling her cat home for dinner. The sound faded, leaving William alone again with his grief and the endless silence that had become his constant companion. William woke to the sound of sobbing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The digital clock beside him glowed red in the darkness, showing 3:47 in the morning. The crying continued, soft but persistent, weaving through the walls of the house like smoke. At first he thought it might be Mrs. Henderson. Perhaps she was having trouble sleeping, mourning her late husband again. But the sound was too close, too intimate. It seemed to come from within the house itself, from the very air around him. William held his breath and listened, trying to pinpoint the source. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate. It was definitely a woman's voice, broken and anguished. The sound made every hair on William's arms stand on end. He threw back the covers and stepped onto the cold hardwood floor, following the heartbreaking cries like a man walking through a dream. The hallway stretched before him, darker than usual despite the nightlight Sarah had plugged in near the bathroom. His bare feet made no sound as he moved toward what had been their shared office. The sobbing seemed strongest there, behind the closed door where Sarah used to pay bills and write in her journal. William's hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. Part of him knew this was impossible, that grief was playing tricks with his mind. But a larger part, the part that had loved Sarah completely, hoped desperately that somehow she had returned to him. He turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was empty, just as he had left it months ago. Sarah's desk sat against the far wall, still covered with her papers and pens. Her reading lamp cast strange shadows in the moonlight streaming through the window. But the sobbing continued, seeming to echo from the walls themselves. William stepped into the room and the temperature dropped noticeably. His breath came out in small white puffs, though the house thermostat was set to 70 degrees. The crying grew more distinct, and now he could make out words between the sobs. "William," the voice whispered, broken and desperate. "William, I'm so sorry." His knees nearly gave out. It was Sarah's voice, unmistakably hers. The same tone she used when she apologized for small mistakes, like forgetting to stop at the grocery store or leaving dishes in the sink. But this apology carried weight that made his chest ache. "Sarah," he whispered into the darkness. "Sarah, is that really you?" The sobbing intensified, and suddenly the room felt crowded despite being empty. William could sense a presence, something that made the air thick and electric. The papers on Sarah's desk rustled without any wind to move them. Her favorite pen rolled across the surface and fell to the floor with a sharp click. "I didn't mean to leave you," the voice continued, clearer now. "The rain was so heavy, I couldn't see. I'm so sorry, William. I'm so sorry I left you alone." Tears streamed down William's face as he sank into Sarah's desk chair. The reality of hearing her voice, even under these impossible circumstances, overwhelmed him. For months, he had wished for just one more conversation, one chance to tell her how much he loved her. "It wasn't your fault," he said aloud, his voice cracking. "You didn't choose to leave. It was an accident, Sarah. A terrible accident." The sobbing quieted slightly, as if she was listening to his words. William looked around the room, searching for any sign of her presence. The shadows seemed deeper in certain corners, and the air continued to feel charged with energy he couldn't explain. I can't move on without you, he confessed to the empty room. I don't know how to live without you here. Everything feels meaningless. You have to try, Sarah's voice replied, fainter now but still audible. You have to keep living, William. Promise me you'll try. The words hit him like physical blows. How could she ask him to move forward when his entire world had collapsed? How could he promise to live when breathing itself felt like a betrayal of their love? I can't, he whispered. I can't do it alone. You're not alone, she said. And for just a moment, William felt warm fingers touch his shoulder. The sensation was so real, so familiar, that he reached up to cover her hand with his own. But his fingers touched only air. The presence in the room began to fade. The temperature slowly returned to normal, and the electric feeling in the air dissipated like morning mist. William sat in the chair, staring at the space where he had felt her touch, unwilling to accept that she was leaving again. Don't go, he pleaded. Please don't leave me again. But the room had returned to normal silence. No more sobbing, no more whispered words. Just the familiar emptiness that had haunted the house for months. William sat there until dawn began to filter through the window, hoping she would return, praying for another impossible moment of connection. The next few days passed in a haze of confusion and desperate hope. William found himself speaking aloud to empty rooms, waiting for Sarah's voice to answer. He left her favorite tea brewing on the kitchen counter and set 2 places at the dinner table. Part of him knew this behavior wasn't healthy, but a larger part clung to the possibility that she might return. Emma visited on Thursday afternoon, bringing groceries and concern. She noticed the 2 place settings immediately, and her face filled with worry as she looked at her brother-in-law. William, she said gently, we need to talk. He knew what was coming. Emma would suggest therapy again, or medication, or a change of scenery. She meant well, but she hadn't heard Sarah's voice in the darkness. She hadn't felt that familiar touch on her shoulder. She came back, William said quietly, not looking at Emma as he spoke. Tuesday night I heard her crying. She talked to me, Emma. She said she was sorry for leaving. Emma's expression shifted from concern to alarm. She sat down across from him at the kitchen table, her hands folded carefully in her lap. William, honey, that's not possible, she said softly. Sarah is gone. You know that. I know what I heard, he insisted, finally meeting her eyes. It was her voice. She was crying, apologizing for the accident. She touched my shoulder, Emma. I felt her hand. The silence stretched between them. Emma clearly didn't believe him, and William couldn't blame her. If someone had told him this story months ago, he would have suggested they seek help. But experiencing it himself was different. The voice had been real, the touch undeniable. Have you been sleeping? Emma asked carefully. Eating regular meals, William. Grief can play tricks on our minds. What you experienced might have been a very vivid dream. William stood up from the table abruptly, anger flashing through him like lightning. How dare she reduce his experience to a simple dream? How could she dismiss the most meaningful moment he'd had in months? It wasn't a dream, he said firmly. I was awake. I was standing in her office, talking to her. She was there, Emma. Sarah was there. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She looked so much like her sister in that moment that William's anger immediately dissolved. Emma was worried about him, just as Sarah would have been. She was trying to help the only way she knew how. I believe that you think you heard her, Emma said carefully. But William, what if your mind is trying to give you what you need most? What if this is your way of processing the grief? The question hung in the air between them. William had considered the same possibility during the long hours since Tuesday night. But the memory of Sarah's voice, the feeling of her touch, seemed too real to dismiss as imagination. That night, William lay in bed waiting. He kept his eyes open, staring at the ceiling and listening for any sound that might indicate Sarah's return. The house remained silent except for the usual creaks and settling sounds. Hours passed without any sign of her presence. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe grief had finally driven him to hallucinations. The thought terrified him more than the possibility of ghosts. If he was losing his mind, then he truly was alone. There would be no comfort in imagined visits, no solace in impossible conversations. But as he was finally drifting off to sleep near dawn, he heard it again, soft sobbing, distant but unmistakable. William sat up quickly, his heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. The crying seemed to come from the living room this time, from the chair where Sarah used to read. He crept down the hallway, his bare feet silent on the cold floor. The living room was dark except for streetlight filtering through the curtains. But in Sarah's chair he could see the outline of a figure, a woman with long dark hair, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "Sarah," he whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and break the spell. The figure looked up, and even in the dim light, William could see her face clearly. It was Sarah, exactly as she had been in life. Her brown eyes were wet with tears, and her familiar smile appeared despite her sadness. "Hello, William," she said, her voice clear and warm. "I've missed you so much." William's legs gave out, and he fell to his knees beside the chair. This was no distant voice in the darkness, no fleeting touch. Sarah sat before him, solid and real, just as beautiful as the day he married her. "How is this possible?" he asked, reaching out tentatively to touch her hand. Her fingers were warm and familiar, exactly as he remembered. She squeezed his hand gently, and the sensation was so normal, so right, that William began to cry. "I don't know," she admitted. "I only know that I couldn't bear to watch you suffering alone. I had to find a way back, even if it's just for a little while." They sat together in the quiet living room, holding hands and talking like they used to do every evening. Sarah told him about the accident, how she remembered the rain and the headlights coming toward her. She described a place filled with light and peace, but said she couldn't stay there knowing William was in such pain. "You have to heal," she told him as the first hints of dawn appeared outside. "You have to find a way to live without me, William. I need to know that you'll be okay before I can rest." "I don't want to let you go again," he said, gripping her hand tighter. "I've been so lost without you." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice infinitely gentle. "But this isn't really living for either of us. You're trapped in grief, and I'm trapped by your pain. We both need to move forward." As the sun rose higher, Sarah's image began to fade around the edges. Her grip on his hand loosened, though William tried to hold on. "Remember that I love you," she said, as her voice grew distant. "Remember that love doesn't end with death. But you have to choose life, William. You have to choose to keep going." The chair was empty again, and William was alone in the morning light. But this time, he didn't feel completely abandoned. Sarah's message was clear, even if he didn't know how to follow it yet. He had to find a way to honor their love by continuing to live. William sat on the front porch steps, watching the morning sun climb over the neighborhood rooftops. 3 weeks had passed since his last conversation with Sarah, and he hadn't heard her voice again. The silence felt different now, less crushing and more like peaceful anticipation. He understood that she was waiting for him to take the first steps toward healing. The coffee in his mug was still warm, and for the first time in months he had actually tasted it while drinking. Small pleasures were slowly returning to his awareness. The way morning light painted gold streaks across the lawn, the sound of children laughing as they walked to school, the familiar comfort of holding his favorite blue ceramic mug. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her fence, watering the flowers that grew along their shared property line. She waved when she saw him, and William surprised himself by waving back. For months, he had avoided eye contact with neighbors, but today felt different. Today, he felt capable of small human connections. "Lovely morning," Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice gentle and hopeful. "Yes," William replied, and meant it. "It really is." The simple exchange felt like a victory. Dr. Martinez had been right when she said healing happened in tiny steps, not giant leaps. William had finally answered one of her phone calls the week before, and they had scheduled their first appointment for this afternoon. Emma's car pulled into the driveway, and William felt genuine happiness at seeing his sister-in-law. She had been carrying the weight of worry for him, along with her own grief, and he wanted to show her that his burden was becoming lighter. "You're outside," Emma said with surprise as she approached the porch. "And you're drinking coffee." "Sarah made me promise to try," William said simply. "I'm trying." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were the good kind. She sat down beside him on the steps, and they watched the neighborhood come alive together. A delivery truck rumbled past. A jogger waved from the sidewalk. Normal life continued all around them, and for the first time since the accident, William felt like he might find his place in it again. "I called the grief support group that Dr. Martinez mentioned," William said, not looking at Emma as he spoke. "There's a meeting tomorrow night at the community center. I think I'll go." "That's wonderful," Emma said, squeezing his arm. "Sarah would be proud of you." The mention of Sarah's pride brought both sadness and warmth. William missed her desperately, and he always would. But he was beginning to understand that loving someone meant honoring their memory by living fully, not by slowly dying alongside them. "I'm going to start cleaning out her things," William continued. "Not to erase her, but to make space for healing. Maybe donate her books to the library where she worked." Emma nodded, understanding the significance of this decision. For months, William had treated Sarah's belongings like sacred relics that couldn't be touched. Deciding to share them with others was a major step toward acceptance. After Emma left, William walked through the house with new eyes. Instead of seeing only emptiness and loss, he began to notice possibilities. The home office could become a reading room filled with books Sarah would have loved. Her garden could be restored as a place of beauty and memory. The answering machine blinked with several messages. For the first time in months, William pressed the play button and listened. His supervisor from the construction company had called again, letting William know his job would be waiting whenever he felt ready to return. His friend Mike had left an invitation to watch a football game on Sunday. Dr. Martinez confirmed their appointment time. People had been reaching out all along, offering support and companionship. William had been too deep in grief to accept their help, but now he felt grateful for their persistence. He picked up the phone and called Mike back. "William?" Mike's voice carried surprise and hope. "How are you doing, buddy?" "Better," William said honestly. "I think I'd like to watch that game on Sunday if the invitation is still open." The conversation was awkward at first. William had forgotten how to engage in normal social interaction, but Mike was patient and understanding, sharing news about mutual friends and work without pressuring William to respond with enthusiasm he didn't feel yet. That afternoon, William kept his appointment with Dr. Martinez. Her office was warm and comfortable, with soft lighting and bookshelves filled with volumes about healing and hope. She was younger than he had expected, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that put him at ease. "Thank you for coming in," she said as they settled into facing chairs. "I know this took courage." William nodded, unsure where to begin. How could he explain the months of numbness, the impossible visits from Sarah, the slow awakening to possibility that had begun in recent weeks? "My wife died 6 months ago," he said simply. "I've been having trouble figuring out how to keep living without her." "That's completely understandable," Dr. Martinez replied. Losing a spouse is one of life's most difficult experiences. Can you tell me about Sarah? For the next hour, William talked about the woman he had loved. He shared memories of their first meeting, their simple wedding, their dreams for the future. He described Sarah's laugh and her terrible singing voice and the way she cried during sad movies. Talking about her felt good instead of painful, like sharing treasured stories instead of examining wounds. "She sounds like she was an amazing person," Dr. Martinez said when William finished. "What do you think Sarah would want for you now?" "She would want me to be happy," William said without hesitation. "She would want me to find ways to honor our love while still living my own life." "That's a beautiful foundation for healing," the doctor said. "Grief isn't about forgetting the person we've lost. It's about learning to carry their love with us as we continue forward." William left the appointment feeling lighter than he had in months. Dr. Martinez had given him permission to grieve at his own pace, while also encouraging him to take small steps toward engagement with life. She had scheduled weekly appointments, and William looked forward to having a safe space to process his complex emotions. That evening, he did something he hadn't done since the accident. He opened the photo albums that had been gathering dust in the hall closet. Instead of avoiding the images of happier times, he welcomed them. Sarah's smile beamed at him from dozens of pictures, and instead of feeling tormented by what he had lost, William felt grateful for what they had shared. He found their wedding album and studied the photos carefully. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's dress, her eyes sparkling with joy and love. William remembered exactly how he had felt in that moment, standing at the altar and promising to love her for better or worse, in sickness and health. The vows had mentioned, "Until death do us part." But William was beginning to understand that love didn't end with physical death. The love he and Sarah had shared was still real, still valuable, still worth celebrating. Death had separated their bodies, but their bond remained unbroken. On Sunday, William drove to Mike's house for the football game. He felt nervous as he rang the doorbell, unsure if he remembered how to be social. But Mike greeted him with a warm hug and easy acceptance, not treating him like a fragile thing that might break. Other friends were there too, and they welcomed William back into their circle without making a big production of his return. They watched the game, shared pizza, and talked about ordinary things. William found himself laughing at Mike's terrible jokes and getting invested in the final score. "It's good to have you back," Mike said as William prepared to leave. "We've missed you." "I've missed this too," William admitted. "I forgot what normal felt like." The following week, William attended his first grief support group meeting. The community center room was arranged in a circle of folding chairs, and about 15 people of various ages sat quietly before the session began. William felt nervous, but determined as he took an empty seat. The group leader, a middle-aged woman named Janet, had lost her teenage son in a car accident 5 years earlier. She spoke openly about her journey through grief, the setbacks and small victories, the ongoing process of learning to live with loss. "Grief never really ends," Janet told the group, "but it changes. It becomes less about survival and more about integration. We learn to weave our love for the person we lost into the fabric of our continuing lives." William listened as others shared their stories. An elderly man mourned his wife of 50 years. A young mother had lost her baby to illness. A teenager grieved the death of her best friend. Each story was different, but they all shared common threads of love, loss, and the slow journey toward healing. When it was William's turn to speak, he felt the familiar tightness in his chest. But the faces around the circle were understanding and patient, and he found himself able to share. "My wife Sarah died 6 months ago in a car accident," he said, his voice steady despite his emotions. "I've been learning that honoring her memory means choosing to keep living, even though it's the hardest thing I've ever done." Heads nodded around the circle. These people understood in ways that well-meaning friends and family couldn't. They knew the weight of grief and the courage required to carry it while still moving forward. After the meeting, several people approached William with words of encouragement and offers of friendship. A woman named Carol, whose husband had died of cancer 2 years earlier, invited him to join a smaller group that met for coffee on Saturday mornings. "It helps to have people who really understand," she said with a knowing smile. "We don't try to fix each other. We just listen and support." William accepted the invitation, recognizing that building new connections was part of his healing process. Sarah had been his closest companion, but she wouldn't want him to live in isolation forever. Over the following months, William slowly rebuilt his life. He returned to work part-time, finding that physical labor helped quiet his restless mind. He started tending Sarah's garden, learning about the plants she had loved and adding new varieties in her memory. The grief support group became an important anchor in his weekly routine. William discovered that helping others process their losses actually aided his own healing. When new members joined the group, raw with fresh grief, William could offer them hope based on his own gradual progress. He began volunteering at the library where Sarah had worked, reading stories to children during the weekly program she had started. The head librarian, Mrs. Chen, had known Sarah well and welcomed William's involvement. "She would love seeing you here," Mrs. Chen told him as he finished reading to a group of preschoolers. "Sarah always said you had a gift for storytelling." William found joy in these simple acts of service. Reading to children, helping in the garden, supporting fellow grievers. These activities connected him to Sarah's memory while also creating new purpose in his life. One evening in late spring, almost a year after the accident, William sat in Sarah's chair by the living room window. The birds were active at the feeder she had installed, and the garden bloomed with colors she would have loved. The house felt peaceful instead of empty, full of gentle memories instead of crushing absence. He no longer waited for Sarah's voice in the darkness or hoped for impossible visits. Their love remained real and precious, but William had learned to carry it differently. Instead of a weight that dragged him down, it had become a source of strength that lifted him up. The phone rang, and William answered with genuine warmth in his voice. It was Emma, calling to invite him to her daughter's birthday party the following weekend. William accepted gladly, looking forward to celebrating life and creating new memories with family. As he hung up the phone, William felt a familiar presence in the room. Not Sarah's ghost or spirit, but the enduring love they had shared, woven now into the fabric of his continuing existence. She lived on in his kindness to others, in the stories he told children, in the flowers that bloomed in her memory. "Thank you," he whispered to the evening air. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me go." Outside, the sun set behind the oak tree in their backyard, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. William watched until the last light faded, then turned on the lamp and picked up a book from the table beside him. It was one of Sarah's favorites, a mystery novel with a worn cover and pages soft from many readings. He opened to the first page and began to read, carrying Sarah's love with him into whatever tomorrow might bring.